The argument was already 3 minutes old when the second alert hit dispatch coordinator Yaneth Dro's console, and she was losing. "I am telling you," Senior Controller Mavic said from the far end of the operations floor, his voice carrying the particular weight of someone who had been running emergency routing for the Selvari Compact for 31 years. "The Ninth Corridor Relay is a decommissioned line. You do not route priority traffic through a decommissioned line." "It is not decommissioned," Yaneth said, not looking up from the blinking panel. "It was downgraded to tertiary status in Compact Year 4410. Tertiary is not decommissioned. Tertiary means it carries traffic when primary and secondary lines are saturated. Tertiary means it has not been serviced in 6 years. Tertiary means nobody has verified signal integrity since the compact transferred oversight to the Provincial Bureau. Tertiary means you are routing a priority distress through infrastructure that may not be functional." Yaneth's hands were still on the console. The routing interface was open in front of her, the cursor blinking in the relay selection field, waiting for her input. Behind Mavic, 3 other controllers on the operations floor had stopped working to listen. Controller Pethai, the youngest on the floor at 19 standard years, was openly staring. Controller Desha, who had been on dispatch for 12 years and had seen every kind of routing argument, was watching with her arms folded and her jaw dark, the Selvari tell for suppressed frustration. The operations floor was a wide, low-ceilinged room in the compact's Emergency Coordination Center, occupying the 43rd through 45th floors of the administrative tower in Selvari Prime's capital district. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind Mavic Station, the afternoon sun lit the city's skyline in pale amber. The light fell across 52 consoles arranged in concentric arcs, each staffed by a Selvari coordinator whose job it was to receive distress calls, route them through the compact's relay network, and dispatch the nearest available response assets. On a normal shift, the room hummed with the low, steady rhythm of routine emergency traffic, industrial accidents, shipping lane collisions, atmospheric containment failures on remote stations. The coordinators processed them with the mechanical efficiency of professionals who had done this work long enough to stop flinching at the severity codes. This was not a normal shift. "Primary is down," Yaneth said. "Scheduled maintenance window that someone in the Infrastructure Bureau failed to flag on the emergency calendar. Secondary is carrying the Veshan refugee corridor's traffic and cannot accept additional load without dropping refugee convoy tracking, which the Central Directorate has classified as Priority 1 for the past 6 weeks. Tertiary is what remains." "Then you wait," Mavic said. "There are people dying on Station Korath 4, Mavic. And routing a distress call through an unverified relay that drops the signal will not save them. It will waste the 7 minutes it takes to discover the relay is dead, after which you will route through the next available line, which will be the compact's military reserve band, which requires authorization from Central, which takes 40 minutes on a fast day and 3 hours on every other day." Yaneth's fingers hovered over the routing interface. The second alert pulsed on her display, a system flag she did not recognize, an automated marker she had never seen fire in her 9 years on the dispatch floor. She ignored it for 3 more seconds. She was watching the feeds from Korath 4. Station Korath 4 was a mineral processing platform in the outer belt of the Selvari system, a structure the size of a small city, anchored to an asteroid, housing 4,000 workers, their families, and a skeleton crew of emergency responders. 47 minutes ago, a coolant reservoir in the station's lower processing tier had ruptured catastrophically. The resulting chemical cloud was working its way through the ventilation system, and the station's atmospheric scrubbers were failing one by one. The station commander had pulled everyone to the upper tiers, sealed the lower sections, and sent a distress call through the compact's standard emergency network. The distress call had reached Yaneth's console 8 minutes ago. By the time she parsed the severity codes and confirmed the situation with the station commander's second transmission, the primary relay was down. The secondary was saturated. The entire emergency routing infrastructure that the compact had spent 4 decades building was, at this moment, reduced to a single tertiary relay in the 9th corridor that nobody had inspected since the year Yaneth joined the dispatch floor. 4,000 people were running out of breathable air, and her infrastructure was arguing with her. "Route it through tertiary," she said. "That is my call." Mavik's expression shifted. He was Selvari like her, tall, narrow-featured, with the mottled gray-green skin that darkened at the jaw when a Selvari was suppressing frustration. His jaw was nearly black. But Mavik had been running dispatch for 31 years, and in those 31 years he had never once allowed a routing decision he disagreed with to pass without putting his objection on the record. That was Mavik. He did not obstruct. He logged. There was a difference, and it was the difference that had kept him on the floor for 3 decades while coordinators with less discipline had been rotated out. "Your call," he said, "logged." Yaneth routed the distress call. The 9th corridor relay accepted the signal, compressed it, and sent it outward along the tertiary band toward the compact's nearest rapid response station, Bastion Uril, 18 minutes away at emergency speed. The relay held. The signal was clean. Yaneth exhaled. Then the second alert flashed again, and this time she looked at it. It was an automated receipt confirmation. Not from Bastion Uril. Not from any compact station. The routing tag was unfamiliar, a prefix she had to look up in the reference manual she kept in the lower drawer of her console, a physical binder that she maintained because digital archives could be corrupted, and the job demanded that you could identify any routing code in the compact's history without a network connection. The prefix was old. It belonged to a mutual assistance treaty protocol that the compact had signed with 4 other signatories during the Orith Corridor crisis, 43 years ago. The treaty had been a temporary measure, a 6-species handshake agreement to share emergency response resources during a cascading disaster that had threatened the entire corridor. The crisis had ended. The treaty had lapsed. The signatories had moved on. But the routing protocol had never been removed from the tertiary relay's firmware. The 9th corridor relay, which had not been serviced in 6 years, had done what relays do. It had accepted the distress signal, and it had routed it to every address in its active distribution table. The compact's Bastion Uril was 1 address. The other signatories' emergency response nodes were 4 more. The relay did not know that 3 of those nodes were dead. It did not know the treaty had lapsed. It did not know or care that the routing table it was using was 43 years out of date. It was a relay. Its job was to relay. One of those nodes belonged to Earth. Yaneth stared at the receipt confirmation. It was formatted in a standard she did not recognize: Terran Emergency Coordination Network, Node 7 Kappa, Outer Selvari Corridor. The confirmation was timestamped 9 seconds after the signal had left her console. 9 seconds. The Terran node was close. She had not known there was a Terran Emergency Coordination node within relay distance of the Selvari system. She had not known because the compact's navigational charts did not list Terran infrastructure in the Selvari corridor. Nobody had updated the charts to include it. Nobody had known they needed to. She pulled up the treaty file. It was archived deep in the compact's legal database, behind 3 layers of administrative permissions that had not been updated since the treaty had been signed. She read the relevant clause, Article 11, Section 3. Upon receipt of a distress signal routed through the shared emergency band, each signatory shall dispatch available response assets to the origin coordinates without requiring bilateral confirmation. Without requiring bilateral confirmation. The distress signal she had sent to Bastion Uril had also gone to Earth's Emergency Coordination Node, and Earth's Emergency Coordination Node had confirmed receipt. And Article 11, Section 3 did not require anyone's permission. Mavic, Yaneth said. What? The tertiary relay has an active distribution table that includes treaty partner nodes from the Orth Corridor Agreement. Mavic turned from his console, his jaw darkened further. The Orth Agreement lapsed. The agreement lapsed, the routing protocol did not. Which treaty partners received the signal? Yaneth read the list. 2 of the 4 non-compact nodes had returned automatic dead-channel responses. The Sorshi and the Kalathi had clearly dismantled their nodes years ago. The third, the Veshan Collective, had returned a forwarding notice to a system that was not operational. Nobody had maintained their nodes. Nobody had kept their end of a treaty that was supposed to be temporary. The fourth had confirmed receipt in 9 seconds. Earth, Mavic said. Earth. A silence settled over the dispatch floor. Controller Pethai's mouth was slightly open. Controller Desha had uncrossed her arms and was leaning forward at her console. Every coordinator on the floor had stopped processing routine traffic. Can you recall the signal? Mavic asked. It is a distress call, Mavic. There is no recall function on a distress call. That is by design. Then contact the Terran node directly and inform them that the routing was an error. It was not an error. It was a valid routing through a valid relay to a valid address on the relay's distribution table. The routing protocol is 43 years old and the treaty it references has lapsed, but the routing itself was technically correct. The relay sent the signal to every address it had. The Terran node received it and confirmed receipt. That is the system functioning as designed. The system was designed for a treaty that no longer exists. The system does not know the treaty no longer exists. The system routes signals. That is what systems do. Yaneth. The third alert hit her console. This one was not automated. It was a direct communication request from Terran Emergency Coordination Network, Node 7 Kappa, a live hail. Yaneth accepted it. Around her, every coordinator on the floor was watching her console. The voice that came through was female human and carried the flat calm of someone who processed emergencies for a living. A dispatcher, like Yaneth, speaking to a dispatcher. Yaneth recognized the register immediately, the way a musician recognizes another musician's intonation regardless of the instrument. This woman had sat in a chair like Yaneth's and watched numbers and worked problems, and transmitted clearly while the clock ran. Selvari Emergency Coordination. This is Terran Node 7 Kappa, Coordinator Hess. We have received your distress relay on the Orth Corridor shared band. We are reading a chemical atmospheric emergency at coordinates matching your station Korth 4. Please confirm the nature and scale of the emergency. Yaneth looked at Mavic. Mavic looked at the ceiling. Terran Node 7 Kappa. This is Dispatch Coordinator Yaneth Dro, Selvari Compact Emergency Center. I confirm the emergency. Coolant reservoir rupture at Station Korth 4. Chemical contamination of lower-tier atmosphere. 4,000 personnel, atmospheric scrubbers failing. Our nearest rapid response asset is Bastion Uril, 18 minutes from the station. Copy. We have 3 assets within response range of those coordinates. UENS Dariush, a fleet support vessel with atmospheric remediation capability, is 14 minutes from Korth 4 at emergency speed. UENS Alder, a field hospital ship, is 19 minutes out. UENS Tabin, a heavy rescue corvette, is 22 minutes. We are prepared to dispatch all 3 under Article 11 of the Orth Corridor Agreement. Do you require assistance? Yaneth's hands went still on the console. 3 ships. A fleet support vessel with atmospheric remediation capability, meaning it carried the equipment to scrub a contaminated atmosphere, equipment that the Compact's own Bastion Uril did not possess. A hospital ship, a heavy rescue corvette with evacuation capacity. Bastion Uril, the Compact's nearest rapid response station, had 2 patrol cutters and a medical shuttle. The patrol cutters had no atmospheric remediation equipment. The medical shuttle had 12 beds for 4,000 people. Coordinator Hess, Yaneth said, I need to clarify, the Orth Corridor Agreement lapsed in Compact Year 4384. It is no longer in legal force. Copy, Coordinator Dro. Our records indicate the same. However, our Node 7 Kappa has received a valid distress signal on the shared emergency band, and our standing protocol for Orth Corridor Treaty Band signals is to respond per Article 11 unless countermanded by a signatory authority. If you wish to formally decline assistance, please transmit a countermand on the shared band, and we will stand down. Coordinator Hess said this the way a dispatcher says everything factually with the routing information attached. She was not offering a gift. She was not making a political gesture. She was describing a protocol. Her node had received a signal. Her protocol said to respond. She was asking whether the Selvari Compact wished to formally decline. Yaneth looked at the feeds from Korath 4. The chemical cloud had reached the second tier. 3 of the station's 7 atmospheric scrubbers were offline. The station commander's voice was on the open channel, calm and measured, directing the evacuation of the second-tier residential blocks to the upper levels. In the background, Yaneth could hear children. She could hear the specific sound of small Selvari voices, too young to understand what was happening, asking questions that the adults near them were not answering. I am not authorized to formally decline assistance, Yaneth said. That authority rests with the Compact's Central Emergency Directorate. Understood. How long does authorization from your Central Directorate take? Yaneth did not answer immediately. The answer was 40 minutes on a fast day. The answer today, with the Veshan refugee corridor saturating every channel the Directorate monitored, was possibly longer. She thought about saying this. She thought about describing the Compact's authorization chain, the request form, the review committee, the diplomatic liaison officer who would need to assess the implications of foreign military assets in Compact sovereign space, the legal officer who would need to confirm the treaty status, the director who would need to sign off. She thought about all of it and did not say any of it. The Dariush is 14 minutes from the station, Coordinator Hess said into the silence. Her captain is requesting permission to proceed. 4,000 people, chemical cloud rising, scrubbers failing, children asking questions. Yaneth made the calculation that every dispatcher makes when the protocols and the situation diverge. The calculation that is not in any manual, but is in every dispatcher who has sat in the chair long enough. She could contact Central, request authorization, wait for the chain of command to process a request involving a foreign military asset responding under a lapsed treaty, and hope that the answer came back before the atmosphere on Korath 4 became unsurvivable. Or she could let the Terran ships come. Coordinator Hess, I am not countermanding. Repeat, I am not countermanding. Please dispatch your assets to Station Korath 4. Copy, Dariush, Alder, and Tabin are en route. Dariush ETA 14 minutes. We will relay updates on this channel. The line held. Yaneth switched to the Korath 4 feed. Around her, the dispatch floor was silent. 52 consoles and not a single coordinator was typing. Mavic was standing behind her. She had not heard him move. You just authorized a foreign military response on Compact sovereign territory without Central's permission, he said. His voice was quiet, not angry, something closer to the sound a man makes when he is watching someone step off a ledge and cannot decide whether to reach for their arm. I did not authorize it. I declined to countermand it. There is a distinction. Central will not see the distinction. Central is 40 minutes away. Korath 4 does not have 40 minutes. Mavic stood behind her for 6 seconds. Yaneth counted them. 6 seconds was a long time in dispatch. In 6 seconds, a scrubber could fail, a seal could rupture, a corridor could flood with contaminated air. 6 seconds was the amount of time it took for a veteran controller to decide whether to put his career alongside a junior coordinator's decision. Then he reached past her and tapped his own credentials into the dispatch log, adding his authentication code below hers. "Logged," he said. "Joint decision. If they come for you, they come for both of us." Yaneth did not thank him. There was no time. The feeds from Korath 4 were degrading. The station's communications array was drawing power from the same systems that were keeping the upper-tier atmosphere sealed, and every minute of operation was a minute stolen from the scrubbers. She could hear the station commander now. Commander Vethais, a Selvari woman Yaneth had never met, whose voice came through the static with the controlled precision of someone managing a disaster she could not stop. Vethais had the voice of a station commander who had done her job for long enough to know the difference between a manageable crisis and an unmanageable one, and who was currently managing the transition between the two. Emergency coordination. This is Korath 4. We have completed evacuation of Tier 2. All personnel are now consolidated in Tiers 5 through 7. Current breathable atmosphere estimate for the upper tiers is 112 minutes at current contamination rate. Scrubber 4 has failed. Scrubber 5 is operating at 30%. If Scrubber 5 fails, the estimate drops to 71 minutes. 112 minutes, or 71. Bastion Earl was 18 minutes away. The Dariush was 14, but neither of those numbers mattered if the scrubbers held. They mattered if the scrubbers failed. The problem was not distance. The problem was redundancy. The compact's emergency infrastructure had been designed for a world in which the primary relay worked, the secondary relay was available, and the nearest rapid response station had the right equipment. None of those conditions held. The relay that had saved the situation was one that Mavic had argued against using. The ships that were coming were ships that nobody had asked to come. Yaneth opened a second line. Bastion Uriel, this is Selvari Emergency Coordination. Status on your dispatch to Korath 4. Coordination, Bastion Uriel. 2 patrol cutters and the medical shuttle are en route. ETA 17 minutes. Be advised, our cutters do not carry atmospheric remediation equipment. We can evacuate personnel from the station, but we cannot process the contamination. Copy Uriel, be advised you will have Terran vessels on station when you arrive. UENS Dariush, fleet support vessel with atmospheric remediation. UENS Alder, field hospital. UENS Tabin, heavy rescue corvette. They are responding under the Orath Corridor shared band. A pause, long enough for the Uriel commander to process what Yaneth had just said. Coordination, confirm Terran military vessels. Confirmed. Another pause. Longer, the Orath agreement. Lapsed in 4384, the relay routing protocol did not. They received the distress signal on the shared band. They are en route. Coordinate with them on arrival. Understood, Uriel out. Yaneth turned back to the Terran channel. Coordinator Hess, I need to relay the station's atmospheric estimate. Current breathable air in the occupied tiers. 112 minutes at current contamination rate, dropping to 71 minutes if the next scrubber fails. Copy. Dariush is 11 minutes out. Captain Okonkwo reports that the Dariush carries a Class 3 atmospheric remediation suite capable of processing a volume equivalent to Station Korath, 4 upper 3 tiers within 45 minutes of deployment. She is requesting the station's atmospheric composition data to calibrate the remediation filters for Selvari breathable standards. Yaneth's breath caught. 45 minutes. The Dariush carried equipment specifically designed to clean contaminated atmospheres. The compact's own rapid response assets of patrol cutters designed for interdiction and escort carried nothing of the kind. The compact had never invested in atmospheric remediation capability for its outer belt stations, because the cost analysis had determined that such events were statistically unlikely enough to justify deferring the expenditure. The cost analysis was on a shelf somewhere in the central directorate. The 4,000 people on Korath 4 were not aware of the cost analysis. "How long to deploy the remediation suite after docking?" Yaneth asked. Captain Okonkwo estimates 20 minutes for hard dock and deployment, assuming a compatible docking collar. If the collar is incompatible, the crew will deploy external scrubber units through the station's cargo airlocks. That adds 8 minutes. 20 minutes, or 28, arrival in 11. Total time to remediation start, 31 minutes at best, 39 at worst. Current air estimate, 112 dropping to 71. The math worked barely if the scrubber held. "Yaneth," Mavik's voice. He was at his own console now, monitoring a secondary data stream from Korath 4 environmental sensors. Scrubber 5 just dropped to 18%. The math stopped working. Coordinator Hess. Scrubber 5 is degrading rapidly. If it fails completely, breathable air estimate drops to 71 minutes. The Dariush's deployment timeline at 31 minutes plus 45 minutes remediation cycle exceeds that window. I heard stand by. 30 seconds of silence on the Terran channel. Yaneth used them to check the Korath 4 feeds. The station's internal cameras were showing the upper tiers, thousands of Selvari workers, families, children packed into residential corridors and common areas. Some were wearing emergency respirators. Most were not. The station's respirator supply was limited, and Commander Vethais had ordered them distributed to children and the elderly first. Yaneth could see the faces. Mottled gray-green skin, some darkened at the jaw with the same frustration tell that Yaneth saw on her own floor every day. Some pale with fear, some blank with the specific numbness that comes when you understand the situation, and know that understanding it does not change it. "Coordinator Dro," Hess's voice was back, steady. "Captain Okonkwo has consulted with the Dariush's engineering team. They can pre-stage the remediation filters during transit if they receive the atmospheric composition data now. This reduces deployment time after docking from 20 minutes to 9. Pre-stage deployment with compatible docking collar, 9 minutes. With incompatible collar and external scrubber deployment, 17. Pre-staging during transit. Calibrating the filters while the ship was still in motion, so that the moment it docked, the remediation suite would be ready to deploy. Yaneth had never heard of that. She did not know if it was standard Terran procedure, or if someone on that ship, Captain Okonkwo, or the engineering team, or a single crew member who had heard the problem and started solving it, had just invented it in the 30 seconds of silence. "Transmitting atmospheric composition data now," Yaneth said, and she pulled the data from the Korath 4 feed and sent it to Coordinator Hess on the shared band. "Received. Dariush confirms data is compatible with their calibration system. Filters are being configured for Selvari standard atmospheric mix." A pause. "Coordinator Dro, Captain Okonkwo has one additional request. She would like direct communication with your station commander to coordinate the docking approach. The Dariush's helm officer needs to know the station's orientation, structural damage status, and which docking collars are operational. Patching you through to Commander Vethais now." Yaneth connected the channels. For a moment, the dispatch floor was quiet except for the hum of consoles and the distant sound of the city beyond the windows. The afternoon light was shifting from amber to gold. Yaneth had been at her console since dawn, 11 hours in the chair, with nothing more than a protein bar at mid-morning and 2 cups of stimulant concentrate that had long since worn off. Her back ached from the chair the Compact's facilities department had been promising to replace for 2 years. Her wrists were stiff from 10 hours of typing. None of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the number on her display, the atmospheric estimate for Korath 4 upper tiers, which was now ticking down in real time as Scrubber 5 continued to degrade. She listened to Commander Vethais and Captain Okonkwo talk. It was a conversation between two professionals who had never met, who served different governments, who spoke through translators that stripped the nuance from their voices but preserved the precision, and who were now coordinating a rescue as if they had been trained at the same academy. Station Korath 4, this is Captain Okonkwo, UENS Dariush. We are showing 3 operational docking collars on your upper tier, ring positions 1, 4, and 7. Can you confirm? Dariush Korath 4. Ring position 1 is operational. Position 4 has a pressure seal fault. It will hold for a single dockhand lock, but I would not trust it for extended operations. Position 7 is operational and has been cleared for approach. Copy. We will take position 7. Our docking team is already suited and standing by. We have done emergency docking on spinning structures before. Korath 4 will not be the first. My helm officer reports your station's rotation is stable. Is that accurate? Stable but slow. We lost attitude control 30 minutes ago when the power distribution grid rerouted to life support. The grid was not designed to handle the redistribution. We are running on emergency firmware that my chief technician wrote in 11 minutes when the standard failover protocols collapsed. We are on residual spin. Residual spin we can match. What is your internal pressure in the occupied tiers? 0.93 standard, dropping. We are losing atmosphere through microfractures in the Tier 4 seals. The seals were never rated for the pressure differential we are asking them to hold. They were designed to separate processing tiers, not to serve as the last barrier between breathable air and chemical contamination. 0.93. Our remediation suite is calibrated for 0.95 through 1.05. At 0.93, the scrubber efficiency drops about 12%. We can compensate by running the secondary filters in parallel, but I need my chief engineer to sign off. Stand by. Yaneth listened. She was not part of this conversation. She was the dispatcher, the person who had connected the call, who had routed the distress signal, who had declined to countermand. Her job now was to sit in her chair and monitor the channels and wait. Waiting was the hardest part of the job. Every dispatcher knew it. You made the call. You sent the signal. You connected the people who could fix the thing. And then you sat in your chair and watched the numbers and trusted that the people on the other end of the connection were as good at their jobs as you were at yours. Korath 4 Dariush. Chief Engineer Vasquez confirms we can compensate for the pressure differential, running secondary filters in parallel. No degradation to remediation timeline. We are 7 minutes from docking. 7 minutes. Yaneth pulled up the atmospheric estimate. Scrubber 5 was at 11% and still falling. If it failed now, the breathable air clock would reset to 71 minutes from this moment. The Dariush would dock in 7, deploy in 9 after that. Remediation would begin in 16 minutes. The station would have 55 minutes of breathable air remaining when the scrubbers started working. 45 minutes to complete the remediation cycle. Total, 61 minutes consumed. Margin 10 minutes. Tight, survivable, but tight. Coordination, Mavic again. His voice carried the specific flatness that meant he had found something that changed the problem. I am seeing an anomaly in the Korath 4 chemical composition feed. The contaminant in the lower tiers is not just coolant vapor. Yaneth turned, what else? The coolant reservoir that ruptured was adjacent to a mineral processing chemical storage unit. The rupture may have breached the storage containment. I am reading trace signatures of thermic acid in the atmospheric mix. Thermic acid. Yaneth's chest went cold. Beside her, Controller Desha drew a sharp breath. Controller Pethai did not react at 19. Pethai had not yet learned what thermic acid did to Selvari respiratory tissue. She would learn today. Coolant vapor was dangerous. It displaced breathable air and caused respiratory distress in high concentrations. But it was a displacement hazard. You solved it by scrubbing the air and replacing the displaced oxygen. The remediation filters could handle it. Thermic acid was a corrosive. At sufficient concentration, it did not displace air. It destroyed lung tissue on contact. The remediation approach was different. You did not just scrub the air. You had to neutralize the acid before scrubbing, or the scrubber filters would corrode and fail within minutes. The Compact's emergency protocols for thermic acid contamination required specialized neutralization equipment that was stored at the Central Directorate's Hazardous Materials Depot in the capital. 4 hours from Korath 4 at emergency speed. Concentration, Yaneth asked. Trace, parts per million in the upper tiers, but the concentration in the lower tiers is climbing. If the contamination front reaches the upper tiers at concentration rather than trace. How long? Mavic checked the diffusion model on his console. His hands moved with the deliberate speed of a man who was forcing himself to be precise, because imprecision would cost lives. 40 to 50 minutes, depending on whether the Tier 4 seals hold. 40 to 50 minutes until thermic acid reached the occupied tiers at dangerous concentration. The Dariush would begin remediation in 16 minutes. Remediation cycle was 45 minutes for standard coolant vapor. If the remediation filters were not configured for thermic acid, they would corrode. The remediation would fail, and 4,000 people would have approximately 25 minutes of breathable air in an atmosphere that was eating their lungs. Yaneth reached for the Terran channel. Her hand was steady. It was always steady. That was the other thing they trained out of you at the Compact's Emergency Coordinator Academy, the Shake. You sat in the chair. You worked the problem. You transmitted clearly. You did not allow the number on the display to reach the muscles in your hand. Coordinator Hess, priority update. We are detecting thermic acid trace in the station's upper-tier atmosphere. Source is a breached chemical storage unit adjacent to the ruptured coolant reservoir. Current concentration is trace, but the diffusion model projects dangerous levels reaching the occupied tiers in 40 to 50 minutes. Thermic acid is a corrosive. It will destroy standard atmospheric remediation filters on contact. Please advise the Dariush that their remediation suite may be incompatible. She heard Hess relay the information. She heard the pause, the specific, weighted pause of a professional absorbing new data that changed every calculation on the table. Coordinator Dro, Captain Okonkwo confirms, thermic acid will corrode the standard remediation filters within 6 minutes of contact. The Dariush's remediation suite is not designed for acidic atmospheric contaminants. The words landed on Yaneth's console like stones dropped from a height. However, Hess continued, and that single word, however, was the word that Yaneth would remember from this entire incident, the word that separated the outcome that happened from the outcome that almost happened. Captain Okonkwo's chief engineer has informed her that the Dariush carries a cargo of polysilicate neutralizing compound, a hull repair material used to seal exterior breaches in corrosive environments. Chief Engineer Vasquez believes the compound can be aerosolized and injected into the station's ventilation system, ahead of the remediation scrubbers to neutralize the thermic acid before it reaches the filters. Has this been done before? No. Yaneth closed her eyes for 1 second. 1 second was all she allowed herself. 1 second to process the fact that the solution being proposed for a crisis involving 4,000 lives was a technique that had never been attempted, using a material designed for hull repair, proposed by an engineer on a ship that had not been asked to come. What does Chief Engineer Vasquez estimate the success probability at? She says she does not estimate probabilities. She says the chemistry is sound. The compound neutralizes acidic corrosives on contact in liquid and solid phase applications. Aerosolized application to a gaseous phase acid is untested, but the reaction mechanism is the same. She says it will work or it will not, And standing here calculating percentages costs time she could be spending modifying the aerosolizer. She is already modifying the equipment. She started modifying it before the captain asked her to. The captain asked her to after. Yaneth opened her eyes. On her console, the feeds from Korath 4 showed the upper tiers, families in corridors, children wearing adult-sized respirators that covered their entire faces, emergency lighting casting long shadows on the curved walls. Commander Vethais was standing at the central hub of Tier 6, directing traffic, her voice still controlled, still precise, still giving orders as if the air were not slowly turning into something that would kill everyone in the room. Coordinator Hess, please relay to Captain Okonkwo that the Selvari Compact's Emergency Coordination Center is grateful for the Dariush's flexibility. Copy. Also be advised, UENS Alder, the hospital ship, is now 12 minutes out. Alder's captain, Commander Rise, reports that the Alder carries a hyperbaric treatment suite for acidic atmospheric exposure. If personnel are exposed to thermic acid at sublethal concentrations, the Alder can treat up to 200 patients simultaneously. 200 patients. The station had 4,000 people. Additionally, UENS Tobin, the heavy rescue corvette, is 15 minutes out. Tobin carries emergency evacuation pods, 38 pods, capacity 50 personnel each. Total evacuation capacity, 1,900 personnel. If remediation fails and evacuation becomes necessary, Tobin can extract roughly half the station's population in a single run. Yaneth did the math. She did it the way dispatchers do math, with no rounding, no optimism, and no margin for wishful thinking. Bastion Ural's patrol cutters could evacuate perhaps 300. Tobin's pods could take 1,900. The medical shuttle from Ural could take 12 more in critical condition. Total evacuation capacity, approximately 2,200 out of 4,000. If remediation failed, they could save roughly half. The other half would breathe acid until their lungs dissolved. She did not say this number aloud. She did not need to. Mavic had done the same math. She could see it in the way his hand stopped moving on his console, in the way his jaw went perfectly still, in the way his eyes stayed fixed on his display without blinking. Coordinator Hess. Understood. Please coordinate with Bastion Ural's arriving cutters for combined evacuation planning in the event remediation is not successful. Already in progress. Terran Node 7 Kappa has contacted Bastion Ural directly on the shared band. Their cutter commander has acknowledged and is integrating Tobin's evacuation pods into the contingency plan. The Compact's own military personnel were now coordinating with Terran military vessels under a treaty that had lapsed 43 years ago, because a dispatcher in the capital had routed a distress call through a relay that nobody had serviced in 6 years, and the relay had done what relays do. Dariush is docking, Hess reported. Hard dock at ring position 7 in 60 seconds. Yaneth switched to the Korath 4 external camera feed. She saw the Dariush for the first time. It was not what she expected. The Terran fleet support vessel was blocky and angular, a utilitarian hull with none of the smooth contours of Selvari ship design. Its surface was weathered, scored and scarred with the accumulated damage of a vessel that had been working in the field for years rather than sitting in a maintenance dock. Engine arrays glowed a dull amber at the stern. The ship's designation was painted on the hull in letters Yaneth could not read, Terran script, but the symbol beside it was recognizable across every species that had ever dealt with humans, a cross inside a circle. The Terran Emergency Services emblem. The Dariush matched the station's residual spin with a precision that made Yaneth's breath catch. The docking collar extended, the magnetic clamps engaged, the seal pressurized. Hard dock confirmed, Commander Vethais reported from the station. Her voice had changed, not in tone, but in something underneath the tone. A frequency that Yaneth recognized because she had heard it in her own voice, in other dispatchers' voices, in the voices of every emergency professional who had been working a clock and suddenly heard the sound of help arriving. It was not relief. Not yet. It was the sound of the calculation changing, the moment when the numbers shifted from impossible to merely terrible. Dariush remediation team is aboard, Captain Okonkwo's voice now, transmitted through the station's internal comms. Chief Engineer Vasquez is deploying the aerosolized neutralizing compound into the ventilation intake on Tier 4. We need the station's ventilation fans active. Even partial operation will distribute the compound through the upper tiers. Fans are at 30%, Vethais replied. That is all I can give you without pulling power from life support. 30% will do. The compound is heavier than your atmospheric mix. It will settle into the lower tiers by gravity once the fans distribute it through the upper sections. That is actually what we want. It neutralizes on contact, so it will chase the acid down. It chases the acid down, Vethais repeated. Her voice held the edge of someone hearing a solution that she had not been trained to imagine. Yes, Commander, think of it as a blanket dropping through the atmosphere. It coats the acid molecules and converts them to an inert salt. The salt is heavier still. It precipitates out. Your air cleans from the top down. Yaneth heard this and felt something shift in her chest, not relief. Not yet, but the desperate cousin of relief. The version that exists when the solution is untested and the clock is running, and the engineer who designed the fix is working on theory and instinct, and the chemistry she learned at whatever academy humans attend. Compound is deployed, Vasquez's voice, the chief engineer, the one who had started modifying equipment before being asked. Ventilation fans are distributing. We should see acid concentration readings start to drop in the upper tiers within 4 minutes. If they do not, the aerosolization particle size is wrong and I need to adjust. 4 minutes. Yaneth watched the atmospheric composition feed from Korath 4. The thermic acid concentration in Tier 6, the highest occupied tier, was holding at trace levels. Not climbing, not dropping, holding. 1 minute, holding. 2 minutes, the number twitched, down by a fraction of a part per million. 3 minutes, down again. The drop was accelerating. The compound was working. The acid molecules were being neutralized, converted to salt, precipitating out of the atmosphere like snow falling through poisoned air. Upper-tier acid concentration dropping, Mavic reported from his station. His voice was the flattest Yaneth had ever heard it. Mavic had been running dispatch for 31 years. He did not let his voice carry anything but data. But Yaneth knew him, and she could hear the thing underneath the data. The sound of a man watching a number move in the right direction after watching it move in the wrong direction for an hour. Confirmed, Vethai said from the station. Tier 6 acid levels declining, Tier 5 holding steady, Tier 4 is still climbing. The compound has not reached Tier 4 yet. Give it time, Vasquez said. 30% fan speed means the compound distributes slower through the lower tiers. It is gravity-assisted, but gravity takes time. For Tier 4 at this fan speed, 12 to 15 minutes. We have personnel in Tier 5 who were exposed to trace acid for the past 20 minutes, Vethai said. Respiratory irritation, some coughing. Nothing critical yet, but I want treatment available. Alder is docking now, Hess's voice on the coordination channel. Commander Rise reports the hyperbaric treatment suite will be operational within 6 minutes of hard dock. Triage teams are staging in the docking collar. The Alder, the hospital ship. Yaneth watched the external feed and saw the second Terran vessel approach, larger than the Dariush, painted white with the same cross and circle emblem, its hull smoother but still bearing the weathering of a working vessel. It docked at ring position 1, the pressure seal faulted collar that Vethais had warned about. Alder is aware of the pressure seal fault, Hess said before Yaneth could speak. Commander Rise has posted a damage control team at the collar. They will hold it manually if necessary. Manually, a human damage control team holding a failing pressure seal by hand, so that a hospital ship could treat Selvari patients exposed to an acid that was being neutralized by an aerosolized hull repair compound that had never been used this way before. Yaneth filed this detail in her mind the way she filed routing codes, precisely, without commentary, knowing that the commentary would come later when she had time to feel what she was currently only able to record. Yaneth's console chimed. Bastion Earl's patrol cutters had arrived at the station. Their commander was requesting coordination with the Terran vessels. Yaneth patched them through to the shared band. For a moment, there were 5 ships at Korath 4, 2 Selvari patrol cutters, 1 Selvari medical shuttle, and 3 Terran vessels, all operating on a frequency that existed because a treaty had been signed, and a relay had not been told that the treaty was over. The minutes that followed were the longest of Yaneth's career. She monitored 4 channels simultaneously: the Terran Coordination Band, the Korath 4 internal feed, Bastion Earl's operational channel, and the Compact's emergency directorate line, which had finally activated with a Priority 1 query from Central demanding to know why there were 3 Terran military vessels docked at a Compact installation. Yaneth composed a response in the 12-word format that the Directorate's duty officer preferred. Station Korath 4 atmospheric emergency. Terran treaty band response. No countermand issued. Stand by. She sent it and returned to the channels that mattered. On the dispatch floor, Controller Desha had begun tracking the Dariush's remediation progress on a secondary display, graphing the atmospheric composition readings in real time. The graph showed 2 lines: coolant vapor concentration falling in a steady curve, and thermic acid concentration falling in a jagged, slower line. The vapor was easy. The acid was fighting back, releasing secondary compounds as it was neutralized, compounds that the remediation scrubbers had to process in addition to the original contaminant. Vasquez had predicted this. She had pre-configured the scrubber sequence to handle the secondary compounds. Yaneth did not know how Vasquez had known to do this. She did not ask. She added it to the list of things she would think about later. Controller Pethai, the youngest on the floor, had pulled up the Orath Corridor Agreement's full text on her console and was reading it. Yaneth saw her stop at Article 11, Section 3. She saw Pethai read it, reread it, and then look at Yaneth with an expression that was half awe and half quiet horror, the expression of a young coordinator who had just understood that the entire response depended on a 43-year-old clause that no one had thought to delete from a relay's firmware. 12 minutes passed. The acid concentration in Tier 4 peaked and began to drop. Vasquez's compound was working its way down through the station's atmosphere, layer by layer, neutralizing the acid and leaving clean air behind. The remediation scrubbers, the Dariush's Class 3 suite, deployed through the station's ventilation system, were now processing the coolant vapor that had been the original contaminant. The combination was working. The air was cleaning. But it was not fast enough for everyone. Coordination, Vethai's voice, controlled but with a new edge, the edge of a commander who has just learned that the crisis she was managing has a dimension she did not know about. We have a group in the Tier 3 maintenance corridor, 19 workers. They were trapped below the initial seal line when we locked down the lower tiers. They have been breathing contaminated air for 67 minutes. Their section had no respirators. I have just established comm contact with them. Their foreman reports respiratory distress in all 19. 3 are unconscious. Tier 3. Below the neutralizing compound's current reach, below the remediation zone, in air that was still thick with coolant vapor and thermic acid at concentration levels that would cause permanent lung damage within the hour. Captain Okonkwo, Yaneth's voice was steady. 19 trapped personnel in Tier 3 below the remediation line. Acid concentration in their section is projected at 230 parts per million. Exposure duration 67 minutes. 3 unconscious. Copy. Okonkwo's voice carried the weight of a captain absorbing a problem she could not solve from her current position. Vasquez, can we push the neutralizing compound to Tier 3 faster? Not without increasing fan speed, which means pulling power from life support. We could lose atmospheric pressure in the upper tiers. I would be saving 19 by risking 4,000. A silence on the channel. The kind of silence that happens when every professional on the line is doing the same calculation and arriving at the same answer, and refusing to say it aloud. Commander Vethais, is there a manual ventilation path to the Tier 3 maintenance corridor? Okonkwo asked. Vethais checked. Yaneth could hear her pulling up the station's engineering schematics. There is an emergency air duct between Tier 4 and Tier 3 that can be opened manually, but it requires someone to enter Tier 4, which is still above trace acid levels, 42 parts per million in the section adjacent to the duct access. Above trace but below dangerous. Barely. Above trace means respiratory irritation within 15 minutes and filter saturation on standard respirators within 30. My people can work in 42 parts per million with our respirators for approximately 30 minutes before saturation. Vasquez, how long to open the duct and get the compound flowing to Tier 3? If the duct is standard gauge and the manual valve is not seized from 6 years of mineral dust, 12 minutes. If the valve is seized, I need a torch. 15. I will send 2 of my crew. Commander Vethais, I need a guide who knows the station layout. Vethais did not hesitate. I will go myself. Commander, with respect, you are managing the evacuation. My deputy can manage the evacuation. I know the Tier 4 layout. I built the maintenance schedules for that section for 9 years before I was promoted to station command. Your people do not know where the duct access is, and at 42 parts per million they cannot afford to spend 20 minutes looking for it. A pause. And they are my workers in Tier 3, Captain. I sealed them in. I made that call. I will go. Silence on the channel. Then Okonkwo said, understood. My crew will meet you at the Tier 4 access hatch in 3 minutes. Yaneth sat in her chair and listened to a Selvari station commander and 2 Terran crew members coordinate an entry into a partially contaminated section of a station that was being rescued by ships that had never been asked to come, under a treaty that had never been renewed, through a relay that had never been told to stop. The valve was seized. 6 years of mineral dust and atmospheric residue had fused the manual release mechanism into a solid mass of corrosion. Vasquez, listening remotely from the Dariush's engineering bay, monitoring through the headset camera of the Terran crew member at the valve, walked the team through cutting it open with a portable torch. The torch produced sparks in an atmosphere that contained trace thermic acid. Yaneth heard Vethais warn the Terran crew about the ignition risk. She heard the Terran crew member, a petty officer whose name Yaneth would later learn was Sato, reply, understood, Commander. Torch is shielded. Sparks won't reach concentration. We're good. The way he said, we're good, flat, factual, the way someone says the weather is clear, was the moment Yaneth first understood that the Terran disposition toward emergency response was not learned behavior. It was temperament. Vethais held a portable lamp in air that was slowly corroding the housing of every piece of equipment they were carrying. The corrosion was visible on the lamp's casing, a fine white powder accumulating on the metal surface as the thermic acid ate into the alloy. Vethais held the lamp steady. She did not mention the corrosion. She had decided that these were her workers in Tier 3, and she had sealed them in, and the fact that the air was eating her equipment was not relevant to the task of getting them out. The duct opened. 11 minutes, not 12, Sato cut faster than Vasquez had estimated. The compound flowed down through the duct, heavier than air, settling into the Tier 3 corridor and beginning the neutralization process. Tier 3's acid concentration began to drop. But the 19 workers had been breathing contaminated air for over an hour, and chemistry does not negotiate with exposure time. When Okonkwo's crew reached the maintenance corridor, they found 14 workers conscious, some sitting, some standing, all of them breathing through cloths they had soaked in water from the corridor's emergency supply, an improvised filter that did nothing against thermic acid but gave them something to hold over their faces. 5 were on the floor. 3 of the 5 were not breathing. The other 2 were breathing in short, rattling gasps that Yaneth could hear through the station's internal comm, a sound like paper being slowly torn. And there was a foreman named Kellish who had been administering his section's single emergency oxygen tank to the worst cases in rotation, 3 breaths per person, then on to the next, cycling through the 3 who were most critical, keeping them alive with nothing but a single tank and the discipline to ration something that every instinct in his body demanded he hold to his own face. Kellish had been doing this for 40 minutes. His own exposure was 67 minutes. He was still standing. The Alder's triage teams came down through the duct. The corridor's normal access was still sealed. They came single file through a passage designed for maintenance crawlers, carrying stretchers, oxygen packs, and portable hyperbaric units. They brought the particular kind of calm efficiency that emergency medical personnel carry the way soldiers carry weapons. Worn, familiar, deployed without conscious thought because the alternative is thinking about what you are seeing, and thinking takes time that the patients do not have. Of the 19 workers in Tier 3, 14 survived. 5 did not. 3 had died of acidic lung damage before the duct was opened. Their lungs had been exposed to 230 parts per million of thermic acid for over an hour, and by the time the compound reached them, the damage was past the point where any treatment could reverse it. 2 died on the Alder despite the hyperbaric treatment suite, despite the Terran medical team's best efforts. The exposure had been too long, the damage too deep, and the Terran physicians had no Selvari-specific pharmaceuticals to address the cellular-level corrosion that thermic acid caused in Selvari respiratory tissue. The Alder's chief medical officer filed a note requesting that the Terran medical database be updated to include Selvari-specific treatment protocols for acidic atmospheric exposure. It was the kind of note that a physician files when she has lost patients she might have saved with information she did not have. Yaneth learned the number. 14 survived. 5 did not. 47 minutes after the Dariush had docked. She learned it from Coordinator Hess, whose voice carried it the way a dispatcher carries every number, factually, precisely, with the routing information attached. 5 dead in Tier 3. 2 dead before the signal was even sent, the original coolant rupture casualties. 7 dead total out of 4,000. 7. Without the Dariush's remediation suite, the atmospheric estimate had been 71 minutes, and the compact had no remediation capability closer than 4 hours. Without Vasquez's neutralizing compound, the remediation would have failed, and the acid would have reached the upper tiers at concentration. Without the Alder's hyperbaric treatment suite, the 200 personnel with trace acid exposure would have progressed to critical respiratory damage. Without the Tauben's evacuation pods standing by, there would have been no fallback if remediation had failed. Without the relay, there would have been no Dariush, no Alder, no Tauben. There would have been 2 patrol cutters with no remediation equipment, a 12-bed medical shuttle, and a station full of people breathing air that was turning into acid. The 40-minute authorization delay for the military reserve band would have consumed more than half the remaining breathable air before the request even reached a desk. Yaneth sat in her chair and watched the atmospheric readings from Korath 4 return to normal, green across the board, the remediation cycle completed. Vasquez's neutralizing compound had precipitated out as inert salt. Her prediction had been exact, an untested technique performing precisely as theorized on the first and only attempt. The station's own scrubbers, relieved of the contaminant load, came back online one by one. The Terran ships remained docked for 9 hours. The Alder treated 312 patients for respiratory irritation, thermal burns from the coolant vapor, and acid exposure at various concentrations. The Tauben's crew assisted with structural repairs to the Tier 4 seals. The Dariush's engineering team helped the station's maintenance crew identify and contain the ruptured chemical storage unit that had been the source of the thermic acid. At no point during the 9 hours did anyone from the Terran crews reference the Orth Corridor Agreement. They did not ask about the treaty's legal status or the routing error or the question of authorization. They did not ask whether they were welcome. They did not discuss the political implications of 3 Terran military vessels operating inside compact sovereign space. They worked. They treated patients. They repaired systems. They ate Selvari field rations when the station's cafeteria staff offered them, and they drank the Selvari stimulant tea that the staff brewed non-stop throughout the crisis. And they pronounced it acceptable, better than acceptable, according to one Terran medic who asked for the recipe and received it, written out in Selvari script on a piece of maintenance paper, from a cafeteria worker whose hands were shaking from the adrenaline she had been processing for the past 6 hours. During those 9 hours, the Compact's Central Emergency Directorate sent Yaneth 7 messages. The first demanded a full explanation. The second asked for the legal basis of the Terran response. The third informed her that the diplomatic liaison officer was being consulted. The fourth asked her to confirm whether the Terran vessels had been formally invited. The fifth asked her to clarify the meaning of no countermand issued. The sixth informed her that a review board would be convened. The seventh, sent 4 hours after the first, long after the Dariush's remediation suite had cleaned the air, and the Alder's medical teams had treated 300 patients, and Vasquez's untested technique had worked exactly as predicted, asked whether the situation was under control. Yaneth replied to the seventh, Station Korath 4 atmosphere restored, 312 patients treated, structural repairs in progress, 7 fatalities total, situation under control. The Terran crews are finishing their tea. She did not reply to the other 6. At the end of the 9 hours, Captain Okonkwo contacted Yaneth's console directly. Coordinator Dro, Station Korath 4 is stable, atmospheric remediation complete. The Alder has discharged all patients to the station's medical facility with treatment protocols for the station's medical staff. The Tauben has completed structural reinforcement of the Tier 4 seals. We are preparing to undock. Captain Okonkwo, I need you to know that the Selvari Compact's Central Emergency Directorate has been contacted regarding the circumstances of your response. I expect they will have questions about the routing, the treaty status, and the authorization. Understood, Coordinator. If they have questions, they can reach us on the Orth Corridor shared band. It is still active. It was never deactivated. No, it was not. A pause. Coordinator Dro. Yes. Your relay worked. Yaneth looked at the console. The atmospheric readings were green. The feeds from the upper tiers showed workers returning to their quarters, families settling children to sleep, the cafeteria staff still brewing stimulant tea. Commander Vethais was on camera in the Tier 6 hub, speaking with Bastion Uril's cutter commander and a Terran officer. Talking quietly, professionally, the way people talk after the crisis is over, and the only thing left is the reports and the questions and the long process of accounting for what happened and why. Captain Okonkwo, Yaneth said. 7 minutes. Pardon. It was 7 minutes from the time I declined to countermand to the time the Dariush began docking procedures. Your ship covered 14 minutes of space in the time it took my government to begin processing the authorization request. We do not wait for authorization on a distress signal, Coordinator. The signal is the authorization. That is not how the Selvari Compact's protocols work. I understand. It is how ours work. Yaneth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Chief Engineer Vasquez. What about her? She modified the aerosolizer before the captain asked her to. Vasquez heard the problem and started solving it. That is what engineers do. On my dispatch floor, we would call that acting without authorization. On my ship, we call it initiative. Yaneth almost smiled. She caught it. A dispatcher did not smile during an incident, even after the incident was resolved, because the log was still recording and the log did not know the difference between a smile and a lapse in professional composure. Captain, when the Central Directorate contacts your vessel, they will ask who authorized the Terran response. What should I tell them? Tell them the relay authorized it. Article 11, Section 3. The distress signal is the authorization. The relay does not know the treaty lapsed. And if they ask why you did not countermand? Yaneth looked at the atmospheric readings. Green. 4,000 people breathing clean air. 14 alive in Tier 3, who would not have been alive without a duct opened by a Selvari commander and 2 Terran crew members in air that was eating the housings off their equipment. 5 dead who might have been saved if the compound had reached them sooner, if the duct had been opened faster, if someone had thought to check the chemical storage containment before the rupture. 5 dead, not 4,005. And even those 5, Yaneth would think about this for a long time afterward. Even those 5 might have been saved if the signal had reached the Terran node 3 minutes sooner, if the duct valve had not been seized, if the compact had stocked thermic acid antidotes on its outer belt stations, if any of the 100 small decisions made by 100 small bureaucracies over the past 6 years had been made differently. But 5 was not 4,000. 5 was a tragedy. 4,000 would have been an extinction event for a station that had existed for 37 years and employed 3 generations of Selvari mining families. Tell them I was busy, Yaneth said. Tell them I had a station to save, and the only ships equipped to save it were 7 minutes away on a frequency that nobody had remembered to turn off. Okonkwo was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Coordinator Dro. Yes. The Orith Corridor shared band, Node 7 Kappa, it will remain active. I did not ask you to keep it active. You did not ask us to come either. The channel closed. Yaneth watched the Dariush undock from Korith 4, followed by the Alder and the Tabin. 3 Terran vessels, pulling away from a Selvari station, their engine arrays glowing amber against the pale light of the Selvari system's sun. They had arrived on a lapsed treated patients of a species they had not been asked to help, neutralized a chemical hazard using a technique that had never been tested, and departed without filing a single claim for compensation, reimbursement, or political consideration. Mavic appeared at her shoulder. He had been at his console for the entire incident. His jaw was still dark. His hands were clasped behind his back in the posture he adopted when he was about to say something he had been thinking for a long time. The relay, he said. The relay, Yaneth agreed. 6 years unserviced, tertiary status. I told you not to root through it. You did. If you had listened to me, the signal would have gone through the military reserve band after the 40-minute authorization delay. The Terran node would not have received it. The Dariush would not have come. Bastion Earl's cutters would have arrived to find a station whose atmosphere was turning into acid, with no remediation capability and evacuation capacity for 300 people out of 4,000. I know. 4,000 people would have had 71 minutes of breathable air, and nobody with the right equipment would have been there in time. I know, Mavic. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached past her and opened the maintenance request system on her console. He navigated to the Infrastructure Bureau's service queue. He found the entry for the 9th Corridor relay. the one marked for decommission review, the one that had been downgraded to tertiary status 6 years ago and forgotten by every department that was supposed to be responsible for it. He changed the status from tertiary decommission pending to active priority maintenance required. Then he opened the distribution table management interface, a system that required senior controller credentials, which Mavic had and Yaneth did not, and verified that the Orith Corridor Treaty Band routing entries were intact. They were. All 4 non-compact nodes were still listed, 2 dead, 1 non-functional. 1 Node 7 Kappa, Terran Emergency Coordination Network, Outer Selvari Corridor, confirmed active, response verified. Mavic did not delete any of the entries. He did not modify them. He closed the interface and looked at Yaneth. Logged, he said. Yaneth did not thank him. She did not need to. The log was enough. The log was always enough. She turned back to her console, filed the incident report. Every detail, every timestamp, every routing entry, every number. And when the report asked for a classification code for the Terran response, she scrolled through the standard options. None of them fit. There was no code for ships that arrived under a treaty nobody remembered, on a frequency nobody deactivated, at a speed that outpaced the government's own authorization chain, carrying equipment that no protocol had specified and solutions that no procedure had imagined. She created a new one. She labeled it with the only classification that described what had happened: unrequested mutual aid treaty band response, no countermand issued. She filed it. She saved it. She pushed her chair back from the console, stretched the ache out of her shoulders, and looked at the afternoon light fading over the capital's skyline. Somewhere in the Selvari system's outer belt, a station full of people was breathing clean air. Somewhere beyond the system's edge, 3 Terran ships were heading back to their patrol routes. Somewhere in the relay network, the 9th Corridor relay was sitting in the dark, waiting for the next signal, not knowing and not caring that the treaty had lapsed and the routing table had never been updated and the protocol had never been deactivated. It was a relay, it relayed. That was the job. Yaneth understood the feeling.